The Salt Iron Conference took the Confucian Daotong as the highest law, people-oriented principles as the standard, and public discourse as procedure. It was a constitutional-type political practice in ancient China. Chenmu writes in Outline of National History, "The Salt Iron debate represents one of the most open and upright great debates between unofficial public opinion and court policy in Chinese history, and indeed carries the significance of a constitutional convention." Yan Buke further elaborates in a draft history of the evolution of scholar-official politics. The Salt Iron Conference marked the use of moral principle and public discourse by scholar officials to constrain imperial power, forming a constitutional pattern in which the DAOTONG stood above the ZHITONG governing order. It provided a historical prototype and legal basis for later scholar-official deliberation, memorial remonstrance, and joint governance. Yu Yingxi emphasizes in Xi and Chinese culture. The Salt Iron Conference took Confucian classics and people-oriented principles as a higher law transcending imperial will, establishing the fundamental principle that power serves the people's livelihood, and thus possessed quasi-constitutional restraining functions. Yang Liangshen comments in Studies in Chinese Institutional History, "The Salt Iron Conference realized equal deliberation between the government and unofficial representatives, correcting power through public discourse, and constitutes an important practice of unwritten constitutionalism in ancient China." Ge Jiangxiong points out in related research that the Salt Iron Conference defined the boundaries of state power through public debate and incorporated popular opinion into top-level decision-making, representing a major peak in the rationalization of ancient Chinese politics. The constitutional value of the Salt Iron Conference is not only uniformly recognized in Chinese academia, but also highly regarded and classically positioned in international sinology and the history of political thought. In his classic study of ancient Chinese economic and political thought, the American sinologist Lewis Maverick argues that the people-oriented thought, the idea of limited government, and the tradition of public deliberation revealed in discourses on salt and iron represent an important model of early political rationality for humanity. Its intellectual depth and institutional practice stand in cross-civilizational comparison with ancient Greek political debate and the Roman Republican tradition, holding universal significance for understanding early ideas of limited government and governance civilization. Antonino Forte, an American sinologist specializing in medieval Chinese political institutions, corroborates this view in his thematic studies, explicitly defining the Salt Iron Conference as a key constitutional event in early imperial China that balanced public authority through public discourse. A ND anchored governance legitimacy in people-oriented principles, affirming its unique value in classical political civilization worldwide. Sinologist at the University of California also clearly note that Discourses on Salt and Iron, as the most completely preserved and fully debated political document from the 1st century BCE, fully presents the distinctive constitutional path of ancient China, determining state policy through public discourse and restraining power through moral principle. IT is an irreplaceable core source for studying the mechanisms of power restraint in imperial China. Bertram Sheffold, a German historian of political thought, places Discourses on Salt and Iron alongside Aristotle's political writings, regarding it as a milestone text in classical human thought on the boundaries of state power, economic ethics, and governance legitimacy. From the perspective of comparative political thought, he affirms its universal constitutional value transcending region, a ND era, and deeply analyzes the logic of limited government and spirit of public rationality embedded in the conference. Japanese sinology has long emphasized the political significance of the Salt Iron Conference. In his research on Han political and economic thought, Yamada Katsumi systematically explains that the core principles established at the conference, no competition for profit with the people, policy-making through public debate, and priority of the Daotong, not only formed the fundamental norms of Han political governance, but also became a central source of ideas concerning limited government, joint rule, and people-oriented governance in traditional East Asian political civilization, profoundly shaping the basic orientation and institutional construction of political order in later regions such as Japan and the Korean Peninsula. Although the Salt Iron Conference produced no written constitution, contractual covenant, or judicial enforcement mechanism, it completed AFARREACHING. Constitutional practice through a complete process, convocation by imperial edict, open debate between court and country, argumentation based on classical texts, policy making through public discourse, and consolidation by political convention. The conference directly addressed the fundamental boundaries of state power, debating whether the government could monopolize the economy, levy unlimited taxes, recklessly launch military campaigns, suppress popular livelihoods, and compete for profit with the people, thereby fundamentally defining ethical and institutional red lines that public power must not cross. IT provided an official, open, and equal platform for unofficial representatives, allowing popular hardships and public opinion to reach the central decision-making level and shape state fundamentals, breaking the closed pattern of arbitrary decision-making by the monarch and bureaucracy, taking Confucian classics and the way of the ancient kings as a transcendent higher law. The conference placed moral principle and people-oriented ideals above the emperor's personal will and short-term administrative interests, establishing the political norm that the Dao Tong guides the Jai Tong. The conference ultimately brought about a fundamental policy shift. The court abolished the liquor monopoly, relaxed control over salt and iron, halted large-scale military expeditions, and allowed the people to rest and recuperate. These principles like curvy and low taxes, no competition for profit with the people, wealth stored among the people, and caution in warfare to secure the people were consolidated as long-term governing conventions. As recorded in Treatise on Food and Commerce, the people gradually settled, and harvests were abundant year after year, a direct confirmation that these constitutional rules took effect and functioned. Unlike the path of Magna Carta, 1215, which constrained royal power through written contracts, aristocratic force, and legal institutions, the Saltine Conference centered on public debate, moral consensus, and political convention, forging a distinctively Chinese path of unwritten constitutionalism. The two approaches differ sharply in form, yet they achieve a high degree of cross-temporal isomorphism in their core constitutional functions, restraining absolute power, defining its boundaries, safeguarding basic popular livelihoods, and establishing fundamental governing rules. The conference also laid the firmest historical and intellectual foundation for later constitutional traditions such as the Tang system of Fenbo, remonstrance and review, Fushu, and the Song principles of ancestral law and joint rule by emperor and scholar officials. 第三节，王莽篡汉，非血缘超制度的权力善待。Section 3, Wang Mang's usurpation of the Han, a dynastic, bloodline transfer of power. In the late Western Han, imperial authority steadily declined, consort clan interference became normal, Confucian, a POCRYPH. AL learning thoroughly penetrated discourses of political legitimacy. A&D land annexation and refugee crises intertwined to intensify social contradictions. Both the bloodline foundation and institutional effectiveness of the centralizing system weakened, creating historical space for extraordinary power transitions. Against this structural background, Wang Mang, uniquely positioned as a leading Confucian scholar, powerful consort clan relative, and paragon of personal morality, rose from inner court assistant ruler to outer court dictator, gradually seizing military, administrative, financial, and cultural power through largely peaceful means. He eventually deposed the young Han ruler, founded the Shen dynasty, and completed an extremely rare and highly typical transfer of supreme power in early imperial China, one based neither on bloodline, military merit, nor hereditary succession. This model of dynastic change completely broke the framework of imperial succession centered on patriarchal clan ties under the Zhou enferment system and Qing Han centralization, and also differed from regime change achieved through military conquest or ministerial coup. IT's legitimacy rested almost entirely on Confucian public opinion, apocryphal heavenly mandates, scholar official discourse, and popular moral expectations. IT stands as the only peaceful, abdication-style dynastic change in ancient Chinese political history accomplished through the symbolic system of the Confucian sage king, an ideological consensus forming a unique case in the imperial succession order from the Qin and Han onward.